fact, but a widespread belief that everyone knows that about Starbucks. I'm here to tell you that I did not, and it is also reasonable to believe that the officers didn't know it either. As I have spoken to a number of people who are not Starbucks customers who are not aware, I was under the belief that people went there and they spent hours and hours, but that the expectation was that they bought something first. I was not aware of that, and so that is on me. I can appreciate, in light of the Starbucks policy and how well known it is to many, why these two men were appalled when they were asked to leave. For this reason, I apologize to them. We have already completed a new policy that guides our officers on how to deal with similar situations. Previously, we did not have such a policy because it is nearly impossible to have a policy for every criminal or any other violation. But we have a policy now, and I'm not going to go into it at this point in time, but we'll be pushing that out at a later date. There are also questions regarding the 911 dispatch call and how it was different than the requests for assistance. A disturbance call, and this is 29 years for me, is one of the lowest priority calls that we have. And while I can understand why people hearing or seeing the radio dispatch difference, it is nothing that alarms police officers whatsoever. It's just a way that these calls are put out. Many of you in the press or who have scanners know that we do not operate under a 10-code system, meaning we don't use codes, we just spell out exactly what the job is. And so this would just be one example, and it's just a generic way to say that there's an issue at a particular location. One thing that is evident in this case is that from reviewing the evidence and having seen the video from Starbucks itself, that these officers who responded were in fact not at all alarmed by the fact that a disturbance call went out, because it goes out so frequently. That is evidenced by the fact that at least one of the officers is seen leaning over the back of an empty chair with his legs crossed, talking in a rather relaxed manner. They did this for approximately 10 or so minutes as they're trying to work their way through this situation. And all the while, as I indicated, they do not know at the time that this was a situation unlike most businesses where you have an expectation to make a purchase. As for the number of officers who responded, that becomes another issue. These officers, just in good faith, were trying to do everything that they could to prevent anyone from getting hurt. I understand how that could alarm people, but the intent was not to intimidate. It was actually to do something different. There's another issue that has arisen from this whole unfortunate incident, and that deals with pedestrian stops, or as some of you like to call it, stop and frisk. While we still have a lot of work to do in this area, we've done a significant amount during the Mayor Kinney's administration. Our pedestrian stops are down over 50% in the last 2 years, and that is evidenced by even the ACLU, and I think they've told you as such in the last couple of days. And if not, I'm telling you now, many of you have already heard that. In addition to which, in terms of underscoring some of the work that has been done to improve upon our relations with community and to make our city better and safer, police-involved shootings are down over 65% in the last 5 years, and they continue to go down. These are just a few things that are indicative of our efforts to do better, and we will continue to strive to do better. The issue of race in this situation is not lost on me. The optics are not lost on me. It is obvious the issue of race is indicative of a larger problem in our society. And I should not at all be the person that is a party to making anything worse relative to race relations. Shame on me if in any way that I've done that. And to anybody listening, to those involved, that is on me, and from my heart, which is pure, from the beginning even till now, I have to do better. And so I just think that as we work to make this city safer and better, we do have to acknowledge that there's still things that we have to work on. And it starts at the top, and that starts with me. And so messaging is important, and I fail miserably in this regard. I am flawed like many other folks, but that is still no excuse. We will continue to acknowledge how race plays a factor and a role in many things that we do. We will also continue to applaud the brave work of the men and women in this city and the fact that they go about their jobs and trying to make this city a safer place. And these are things that, you know, will require a collaborative effort. And so we will continue to do that. It is important for me to say, for some who may wonder, no one asked me to do this, no one made me do this, for reasons that I won't get into. I certainly could not be required to do it. I'll take your questions at this time.
Commissioner, you mentioned a new policy for similar situations. Are you referring to potential trespassing calls, or can you elaborate a little bit?
So in particular, I am talking about potential trespassing calls. I'm talking about a policy that first and foremost, to be blunt, where we ensure that we get cooperation from managers or someone in authority, and that also that we don't get manipulated by any employee into extracting anyone from a business that shouldn't be.
Is that what happened here?
I don't know, but it's certainly, if there's an issue where you have a company policy that allows people to stay without purchasing, and that's the reason for your call, it begs the question, why that happened in the first place.
Would you describe that as being excessive?
Which part? No, because what happened is you have to kind of go through the numbers. It's a good question. So first, the way the call comes out and the way the officers come in, literally the first officer, the arresting officer didn't even know who the individuals were. So he wasn't looking for anybody in particular. He had to be directed there. He had two officers almost get there simultaneously with him. It's not for a while that other officers get there, and it's that prompting of the call for a supervisor that does kind of make officers' antennas go up to wonder what is going on. So while I fully appreciate and acknowledge how it looks that way, it was not designed to be that way. It is not uncommon, particularly if there are officers in the area. But I can put myself certainly in the shoes of others who don't necessarily, just like I don't know Starbucks protocol, who don't know police protocol, to understand or try to understand, what's going on and why are there this many officers here and why am I being put out in the first place. And so, again, it starts with me, and it starts with me grossly misunderstanding Starbucks policy, and quite frankly, it took me a while to even get my brain around it, because I still was thinking that the process centered around a need to buy something first, and then you could hang out all day long. That is what I thought. Clearly, I was wrong, and so I can only assume that the officers thought as much as well.
When you listen to the 911 call that was released, you hear, I guess, what presumably was a female store manager say, there are two gentlemen here who refused to make a purchase or leave. How does that translate to the dispatcher saying there's a group of males causing a disturbance and trespassing?
Right. So again, as I was trying to suggest when I was speaking earlier, that is something that I understand why, folks would hear that and say, well, that makes no sense to me, but that poses no alarm for us whatsoever. That is so routine, I can't begin to describe it. And again, it's very, very low on our priority calls. Disturbance is something, I guarantee you, if you turned on a radio scanner right now and you scanned across this city, I'd be surprised if you don't hear it at least once in the next 10 minutes. And so I just say that again to underscore that in and of itself, as it relates to the officers and their response to the situation, really didn't mean a whole lot to them.
And is it typical for that number of officers to respond to that kind of call?
And again, this is to his question. It's not about what's typical. It's about how things unfold. Okay. And so you could get more than 2 or 3 officers respond to any call if some just happen to be in the area. I think what happens in this case, they're there for a while. Their colleagues know they're there for a while. Then they hear for a call for a supervisor. And so then other officers come in. What is important also to emphasize in this situation is that these officers, despite the fact that many disagree with how things happen, they never verbally abused these men, and they never physically abused these men. They were making every attempt to quell this situation that they possibly could. In this case, we did not have a policy. I would submit to you that probably very few departments do in cases like this, but that you're free to find that out. But I would imagine very few do, because there's just simply too many issues in the violations code to cover everything, as I said previously.
Mr. Ross, you said that the officers did nothing wrong. Are you sticking to that?
No, I think I addressed that as well. I said that I should have used language that they follow the law instead of, and this is why I said that's all on me in messaging. And so I am not sticking with it.
But they follow the law.
They did follow the law and it's because there's no policy up till now, you know, the law allowed them to do that. And I guarantee you, if you were to take a look, you know, there are multiple calls much like that all across the city. You don't even have to leave Center City for people who are not purchasing something who are asked to leave. The difference is in probably 98, 99% of those businesses, there is an expectation that you're going to buy something and not hang out in the store. And so that's the difference. So, but in answer to your question, didn't do anything wrong, probably is not the best language to use. It wasn't the best language to use.
And these officers, they were on bikes, right, patrolling the area.
Right.
Does that kind of have an effect on how many respond to an area? Because if you're in a certain vicinity.
It all can have an effect. I mean, you know, bikes are there's at least one that was assigned to that immediate area. There certainly were some, you know, not far away. And so that, in conjunction with cars who may be in the area, Center City is somewhat congested anyway. So all those things can be a factor. It's just no one way to say how many police officers will show up at any given scene. Sometimes you'll have far more volatile scenes from the beginning where you wish you had more, and they just aren't able to get there. So it's just no sure way to put it.
Just a few more. Have you spoken with the FOP since this incident?
I have not. I have not.
Have you had a chance to meet with the two men who were arrested?
No, and to be honest with you, by design, I wouldn't have done that because there was a fax, I believe, that was sent immediately that, you know, don't talk to my clients. So I would be within that scope as well, so it wouldn't be expected.
Commissioner, is it going to be now more holistic approach? They enter a business, for example, on a trespassing disturbance call, and they talk with the manager, talk with the folks that are being called, or what is?
Well, they did all that. They talked to the manager. I mean, that's who called. And so that part wouldn't change. I think the one thing that, you know, probably we tacitly thought or understood was that there was going to be charges pressed. And in fact, that was not going to be the case. But I understand why they would have thought that. That's what the call was. And you see them being escorted out. But that would be part of any new process to ensure that that individual who's in charge of that entity or that place would say, I have in fact, and obviously this wouldn't apply to Starbucks under these circumstances, but in any other one where there are a myriad, are you in fact going to prosecute before we leave? If you are not, we are leaving, and that's just the way it is. It is a very unfortunate circumstance all the way around. Again, for those who either naively, even some maliciously, who think that I don't understand issues of race. I'm 54 years old. I've been an African American my entire life. And yes, I've been in situations where I've seen racism and prejudice in a variety of ways. Based on what these officers responded to, I just don't believe that was the case here. As for that manager, that's a whole nother ballgame. But as far as these officers, they acted in due diligence on what they knew. They tried for quite a bit of time. But again, I understand the optics. I understand it. And I'd be remiss to say that I didn't, particularly in light of, as I've said about 5 times, what I now know is Starbucks policy. It became somewhat amazing to me, the number of people who have told me that there are just a plethora of people who believe that everybody knows Starbucks policy. Well, I don't drink coffee and I don't go to Starbucks. And so, you know, whether you say shame on me for that, I'll accept that, but I didn't know it, but I can only assume the police officers didn't know it as well. I can assure you of this, that had they known that this would not have gone that way. And more the more important thing to emphasize is I guarantee you they had better things to do than deal with a call like this, which essentially, from Starbucks' own policy, violated their policy. They would have rather been out there preventing someone from getting hurt in another way than in this fashion. And so they were put, in some ways, in an untenable position. And I know some people either don't or refuse to understand that, but that's just a reality. But it is me who, in large part, made most of the situation worse than it was. And so for that, you know, it is my sincere apology to those two men and even to these officers and to the other people around this city who I failed in a variety of ways on this incident.
Did those two men cooperate with your officers when they arrived?
There's some dialogue, but what is interesting in the video, there is no audio. And you can't actually see the two men in the video screen, even though they had multiple screens, but no matter which one we look at, we can't see them. But you can see the officers, and you can see they're relaxed. At one point, one is literally on the back of a chair like this with his legs crossed, which is not indicative of someone who's about to, you know, jump across the table or anything like that. The fact that they were there for well over 10 minutes suggests that they are trying in all earnest to resolve this situation. It's just one situation that I understand all the way around, and none of that makes for their discomfort, their lack of sentiments towards the police as a result. I understand, and I understand how disconcerting it could have been, but I also understand the position the police were put in because someone made a call knowing that their policy differed than what they put out.
That's okay. There was some dialogue between the officers, and then they suggested that they were speaking down to your officers and giving them a hard time, asking them 3 times a week. Is any of that true?
Well, yeah, I mean, but again, and I'll say it for about the 7th or 8th time now, presumably, like myself, they knew nothing about Starbucks' policy. And so here you got two opposing forces probably understandably not coming to a meeting of the minds on this, because these officers have probably on countless occasions responded to calls like that from merchants who wanted people gone because their policy is, in fact, that if you don't purchase something that you are supposed to leave. And those men undoubtedly can't understand why am I even being asked to leave in the first place? Because this is your policy, this is your, and it took a while for me to understand it, even my conversations with the CEO, but he spent some time with me. And me talking with other folks who frequent Starbucks, I have a better understanding. And as a result of that understanding, I know that it is me that was flawed in this situation.
So did the officers have a choice to not arrest the men even though they refused?
Well, you have to put it in the proper context. So if you take it outside of Starbucks, right? Because if you leave it in Starbucks, then it becomes like a circular logic. But if it's outside of Starbucks, where a place clearly has a policy where they expect you to purchase something and you do not, and then they call the police then are stuck in a situation where they're asked to remove someone. And so we don't kidnap people, and people were saying, well, why didn't you just handcuff them and throw them outside? Well, that's not the law. And once we take it to that far, then we have to assume that we're arresting you. The first aim was to try to get them out of the store, and there were negotiations. There are many who undoubtedly, and I understand it, will think that that was not enough. But I would submit to you that 10 minutes of trying to do that, but again, I balanced that with now understanding why these men thought what they thought. And so the officers would have had no way of knowing that. You can't expect for them to walk in every business and intuitively know what every policy is. I mean, that is unreasonable in many instances. And so, but again, I mean, it just comes back to a notion that we have to do better. I have to do better. Or whoever sits in this chair has to do better, whoever that may be. They have to do better. And so at the end of the day, that is my pledge to everybody in this city to do better. And so I just close with, again, you know, my apologies to both them, the police officers, and everybody else in this city, because I exacerbated the situation with my messaging. Real simple.
I just wanted to curiosity, if you talked to both of the officers, and is there anything that they want the general public to know?
I had several conversations with the arresting officer, and he was absolutely from the beginning, and this is, still don't even know if to this point, if he absolutely knows Starbucks' policy, because I haven't spoken to him about that part. But I can tell you from the beginning, he has been absolutely mortified. Nothing about this officer, and I did my homework, suggests that he's a guy who goes out to harass anyone. He was just trying to do his job. He was put in a very unfortunate circumstance. People talk about the word discretion. Discretion, as I've said a couple times this week, does not mean that option A or option B, that if you choose either one, that one is wrong and one is right. Discretion means that you have the discretion. It's much like if I stopped you for a traffic violation and say Ku Kennebrew gives you a ticket and I don't, I'm not right and he's not wrong, or even vice versa. That's discretion. And so I would submit to folks also that talk about de-escalation, that 10 minutes of conversation was an effort of de-escalation. The problem is you had an imperfect storm brewing where two different people were viewing through two different sets of lenses, and that's not to make an excuse for police. I'm just saying that, that's probably had a lot to do with the situation.
Commissioner Ross, the policy that you spoke of,
Right.
you're working on that, it's coming?
It's actually, so the gentleman behind you in the suit, Staff Inspector Healy, actually has already completed that. We have not pushed that out. And, at some point in time, we will let you know. But it really is going to deal with making sure you identify the person, making sure that person clearly articulates what their policy is, trying to de-escalate the situation. And even if you need to and you think it requires it, calling in an officer with crisis intervention training if you think it goes to that level. Most of the time they won't. This is a very routine call, believe it or not, that in many instances is resolved before we even get there. Sometimes it's just the threat of calling the police. Sometimes it's our presence, and sometimes it's other discussions. Are there arrests made for this frequently? Yes, there are. There are. So
When do you anticipate that the policy?
I don't know. That's what I'm saying. We're going to push it out as soon as we can. All right? So the important thing to let you know is, although it's probably somewhat of a unique policy, it is one that we feel, given the circumstances and all that has happened with this, that it warrants our implementing a policy of this kind.
Thank you.
All right?